function of RNA. That's one way that helps the DNA, is to be a temporary disposable copy of some of the genetic information. Alrighty, so far?
RNA produced by something?
Yes, yeah, just as the cells make DNA when they need DNA, they make RNA when they need RNA.
That's done by?
There are enzymes inside the nucleus that, in this case, can scan the DNA sequence, and then based on that sequence, the enzymes produce an RNA copy of it. All right, good questions. All right, so most of the, I'm sorry, Rex.
Can you move the mic to the one side of your arm?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, you know, Rex is kind enough to videotape this, and then he's going to give me the web address pretty soon, and I'll post it on the course website. All right, so most of the RNA inside the cells is being used to assist the DNA be the genetic, carrying out its genetic functions. That being said, there are three special types of RNA molecules that have energy-related roles inside the cell. In other words, there's three special types of RNA molecules that are not involved in helping the DNA be the genetic information. And these special RNA molecules are called ATP, NADH, and FADH2. There we go. So as I said, these RNA molecules have a role in energy. And let's look at them a little closely here. Probably the most important one on the list is ATP. Here's what it looks like. There's the ribose sugar. Now I left the oxygens off the bottom here, but if I did put them on, you'd see an OH there and an OH there, so that should key you in. It's ribose, not deoxyribose, and so therefore it's an RNA nucleotide. It has the adenosine nitrogenous base there. And notice instead of having just one phosphate group, it has three phosphate groups there on its tail. And that's actually where its name comes from. It's adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And its role is as the energy carrier or energy delivery molecule inside the cell. There's a lot of processes that the cell must do to keep itself alive that require energy. There are enzymes, for instance, that require energy to carry out their function. There are transport proteins in the membrane that require energy to move things through the membrane. Any process in the cell that requires energy can grab one of these ATP molecules that's floating around inside the cell and get energy out of it. ATP is just kind of intrinsically a high energy molecule, and it delivers that energy to any proteins in the cell that need energy. Here's an illustration of that concept. There's an ATP molecule. And so when you think of ATP, think of super energy charged molecule. I sometimes show like a super powerful charged up battery when I think of ATP. Now, in a past semester, somebody raised their hand and said, well, so does ATP have electrical energy in it? And it's not electrical energy. There's a type of energy called chemical energy, which is stored in the covalent bonds of the molecule. So it's not electrical energy, but nevertheless, it is energy that's stored up in the ATP molecule. So when any protein in the cell needs to do work, needs energy, it just grabs one of these ATP molecules that's floating around inside the cell and gets energy out of it, and that provides the protein with the energy that it needs. All right, now, to get the energy out of the ATP molecule, what you have to do is pop off that last phosphate, that third phosphate there. To make an analogy, think of like a bottle of champagne. If you've got a bottle of champagne and shook it up, there's a lot of pressure energy inside there. But if you pop off the cork, then you let all that energy out, and it's not going to have any energy in it anymore. That's the way to think of that last phosphate. That is the cork that holds the energy in. So the enzyme grabs the ATP, pops off that last phosphate, the enzyme gets the energy out of it, and what you have left, well, it's now called adenosine diphosphate because it only has two phosphates stuck on the tail there. And that phosphate that was popped off, like the cork from the champagne bottle, is called inorganic phosphate, or PI for short. Inorganic means not part of an organic molecule. Notice that it's no longer attached to anything containing carbons, it's just a phosphate group floating around by itself, so it is inorganic phosphate. And in this state, in the adenosine diphosphate state, there is no more energy left in it. It's like a dead battery now. Okay, now, so it's vital that cells have lots and lots and lots of ATP, or I should say, cells use lots and lots of ATP because they have thousands of different enzymes, and all those enzymes are constantly carrying out chemical reactions inside the cell. And so you would think at first that cells must have a huge, high concentration of ATP inside themselves to constantly power all these reactions. But the fact of the matter is they don't. They have a relatively small amount of ATP inside themselves. But what cells rely on is recharging their ATP supply. The ATP is like a rechargeable battery, and so what the cell can do is take that inorganic phosphate and stick it back on right there, and when it does, it's been recharged up to ATP again. But you know from experience, it takes energy to recharge a battery, and that's where carbohydrates and fats come in. When I was telling you about the carbohydrate family and the lipid family, which is the fats, I said these molecules are energy providers. They're used for energy storage. What I'm telling you now is that, yes, cells take in carbohydrates like glucose, and cells take in fats, but as soon as those molecules enter the cell, the first thing the cell does is suck the energy out of them and use it to recharge the ATP supply, because the ATP is going to be what directly supplies energies to the proteins that run the cell. In other words, there are no proteins that grab glucose for energy, and there are no proteins that grab fats to energize themselves. All the proteins grab ATPs, and so the cell converts glucose and fats into ATP energy as soon as it can. All right, so ATP, very important molecule inside living things. And here's what the story is on these other two molecules. So again, remember these are RNA molecules. ATP is RNA, NADH and FADH2 are RNA molecules. I define these two here as coenzymes, and let's remember that if this represents an enzyme, and here's the active site of the enzyme where it binds the substrate molecules it works with, some enzymes need a non-protein molecule in their active site to help them bind onto their substrate. And the official name for that sort of thing is a cofactor. But some cofactors are organic molecules, carbon-containing molecules, and if that's the case, you call that type of cofactor a coenzyme. And again, the purpose of a coenzyme is to help the enzyme grasp hold of whatever molecule it's supposed to be working with. So NADH and FADH2 are coenzymes that are made out of RNA. They're small RNA coenzyme molecules. And what they help the enzyme grab hold of is actually electrons, high energy electrons. Here's I think I ripped this off from a nutrition book, but one of these coenzymes starts off as this form, it's NAD+, and that's what biologists refer to it as, although nutritionists call it niacin vitamin. Same name for two different names for the same substance. But anyway, if this enzyme needs to work with electrons as part of the chemical reaction it carries out, the enzyme will need an NAD coenzyme to help it grasp hold of those electrons. And so here you can see it in action. The NAD grabs hold of actually two high energy electrons for the enzyme. 1, 2. And whenever an NAD coenzyme is holding a couple of high energy electrons for the enzyme, the NAD will also carry along a hydrogen ion as well. always takes two electrons and one hydrogen ion. And when it does, that hydrogen that it took in is now part of the molecule. So now, instead of just being NAD, it's now NADH to show that it's carrying that hydrogen there. And I guess that's the gist of it. Let's see what I have here. I guess that's it. So when you think of this NADH, just think of it as a carrier of high energy electrons. Now you might wonder, well, what's the enzyme going to do with those high energy electrons? Well, let me forestall that question for a little bit later on in the semester. But essentially it's going to use those high energy electrons for some chemical reactions that the cell is going to carry out later on. The FAD molecule is pretty much the very similar story. It's also a RNA molecule, and it also carries high energy electrons for certain enzymes. Nutritionists call it vitamin B2 or riboflavin vitamin. Very similar deal. It can carry two high energy electrons. And it can also bind two hydrogen ions, or I should say every time the FAD picks up two high energy electrons, it also simultaneously picks up two hydrogen ions. So the FAD becomes FADH2 since it's carrying those two hydrogens with it. I guess that's about it. We will see the FADH2 and the NADH use those high energy electrons in a couple of weeks when we talk about something called cellular respiration. Sound good? All right, last night I had a dream where I had to take a computer science course, and I know nothing about computer science, and the teacher was going on about something on the board, and I had no idea what he was talking about. I felt very lost, and it was a very scary dream. And I thought, God, I hope my students don't feel that way when they come out of my lectures. So if I'm completely bewildering you and I'm making no sense, please stop by my office hours or raise your hand, and I'll try to be clearer. All right, so we're going to start a new chapter now on cells. And to start off with, maybe I should mention a little history of the cellular theory of life. Probably for as long as there's been human